My name is Martin Yao, and I've been a qualified physio for 5 years, specializing in helping volleyball athletes achieve pain-free play. In the last 5 years alone, I've helped hundreds of volleyball athletes attain their freedom from pain, and in this video, I'm going to share with you something that I've never shared before. I'm going to break down what it takes to successfully rehab knee pain, arguably one of the most common injuries amongst the volleyball community, and also one of the main reasons why volleyball athletes actually retire from the sport that they love so much. Let's dive in. So if you've been following me for a while, then you know how much I stress knowing exactly what your injury is and why it's happened. And if you're not familiar with why these are so important, I'm going to link one of my videos in the description below, and I highly recommend you check it out before continuing. But pretty much the concept is, if you don't know what it is and why your injuries happen and you're trying to rehab it, it's pretty much like finding something in the dark. There's an off chance that you might get there and if you're really lucky, but the majority of the times your rehab is going to be unsuccessful. So knowing exactly what your injury is and why it's happening is the first step. So let's have a look here. So you're obviously here because you have knee pain. And if you have knee pain, you are probably sad, and that's you right now. There's only really two categories in which you can fall in when you have knee pain. So let's break those down first. So you have what we call gradual onset. So that pretty much means the pain built up over time, right? It could be a couple of days, couple weeks, couple months. Doesn't really matter, but there wasn't like suddenly an 8 out of 10 pain. It started with like a 1 and then slowly built up, all right? You get what I mean, gradual onset. Now in the same category, I actually put acute, but with no clear mechanism. Now that's a mouthful, but let me explain to you what that is. Acute, but with no clear mechanism means your knee pain actually suddenly occurred, but there was no moment. It was just like one day you're playing, and then after playing, you're like, oh crap, my knee actually really hurts. But you think about it, and you go, I can't really think of any specific moment in which my knee suddenly started to hurt. So that's what I mean by acute, but with no clear mechanism. And you'll see later why these two are actually in the same category, okay? Let's leave that for a second and let's talk about the only other category that you could fall under. And that's acute, but with mechanism. Okay? Acute but with mechanism usually involves something like a ligament tear. So you've got obviously the very infamous ACL, MCL, LCL, PCL. I'm not going to list all the things in the knee. It could also mean a meniscus tear. All right, and there's a plethora of meniscus tears, and again, I'm not going to list all of them. But you get the idea. It's something that happened suddenly, and you remember a specific moment in which your injury happened, and usually after one of these injuries, you can't really walk properly. It's really sore. You're most certainly not going to be able to play on it. That's what I call acute, but with mechanism. Now, if you're in this category, it's really important to work out and consult your health professional, okay? So I want you to consult your health professional because you don't want to get this wrong. Sometimes if you get this wrong, people, for example, when it comes to MCLs, if you have an MCL tear, a lot of the times you will need to be in a brace, and if you don't brace yourself, then the MCL itself won't heal, and that's obviously something that you don't want to miss, right? So it's really important to consult your health professional. If you want my opinion on it, I'll leave a link where you can DM me on Instagram and I'll be able to have a look at it. But pretty much it's really important to get this right. To be fair though, a lot of the times what you realize is if it doesn't require an MRI or like further specialist opinion, you're going to end up back here anyway. Okay, but I'm not going to talk too much about this because this isn't the focus of this video, but pretty much if you had an acute injury with a mechanism, go see someone about it, make sure you know exactly what's happening, and then you're going to be back here anyway. So if this is you, go see a health professional and come back to here after you're ready to start some rehab. So if you're not in the acute but with a mechanism category, then you're going to be in the gradual onset or acute but with no clear mechanism. So let's talk about that. So gradual onset or acute with no mechanism. All right, I'm not going to write the whole thing out again. Now, there's only two different diagnoses that you can get when it comes to gradual onset or acute, but with no mechanism. And so let's break those down. The most common one that most of you are going to be faced with is what we call jumper's knee or tendinopathy. All right. When it comes to the knee, there's only two different types of tendinopathy. You've got patella, which is actually common term jumper's knee, or you've got quad, which is also in the knee, but it's not really commonly termed as jumper's knee. The second category in which you can fall under is what we call PFPS. Now, what that stands for is patella femoral pain syndrome. Okay, I'm not going to explain to you guys exactly what the physiology and mechanism behind this is, but I'll tell you some of the characteristics behind it a bit later. Let's talk about jumper's knee. What are the most common symptoms when it comes to jumper's knee? So the most common symptoms when it comes to jumper's knee is, they'll usually complain about pain after volleyball. So during, it's not too bad, but after, it really hurts. All right, feels better after warm-up. So, after the first few spikes really hurt, then it goes, oh, it's not too bad. And they can't actually feel it for the majority of the training. That's classic when it comes to a tendinopathy because it feels better when it's warm. Now, the last thing that they usually will be able to tell you is what we call point tenderness. So what point tenderness is they can point and say, this is exactly where it hurts, right here. Usually it's right below the kneecap or right above the kneecap. Those are the two most common spots when it comes to point tenderness. So if you've got any of those three or more than one of the three, you've definitely got jumper's knee. Okay? Now, what's PFPS? What are the common symptoms of PFPS? PFPS is usually gets more painful the more they play, right? So very different from jumper's knee because it's jumper's knee people feel better as they warm up. But these PFPS people, the more they use it, the worse it gets. It's also vague pain. What I mean by vague pain is unlike jumper's knee where they can point and go, oh, this is exactly where it hurts. If you ask someone with PFPS, oh, where does it hurt in your knee? They'll be like, oh, I don't really know. It kind of hurts everywhere. Like they'll point in the general vicinity, but they won't be able to point and tell you this is exactly where it hurts, right? So that's the difference between the two. Okay, let's talk about jumper's knee or tendinopathies in general, because a lot of you guys are obviously going to be here because of that. So when we talk about overload injuries or tendinopathies, right, tendinopathy, tendinitis, it again can be broken down into two categories. You can either get overloaded because that structure, which in this case is the quad, is weak. So if your quad is weak and you're jumping, you're landing, you're jumping, you're landing, obviously it's going to develop into an overuse injury. That's the first category. Now, the second category is what we call overcompensated. Again, we're talking about the quad here. So if your quad is really strong and your body uses it over and over and over again because that's the strongest muscle that you have and the other muscles aren't really good at producing force and the body can only really use this, then we call it an overcompensation. And that's another way you can get a tendinopathy. So the analogy that I like to give for this is if you have 4 builders, right, and 3 of them decide, you know what, I don't really want to work anymore, and they kind of leave. That one person that's left is going to be left with all this work. And no matter how strong and how, fit he is, he's never going to be stronger than 4 people combined. And if you're the manager and you're overlooking this construction process, if you're a good manager, you're not going to be like, you need to go to the gym and make yourself even stronger and even fitter so they can do the work of 4 people. If you want this project to be done well, you're probably going to end up hiring 3 new guys to help him out. It's the exact same concept here. If you're overcompensating with your quad, you need to work out what else isn't working, make them stronger so the quad doesn't have to do all the work. This is actually where so many volleyball athletes go wrong in their rehab, because a lot of them will be doing the protocol that is actually for weak quads. Why? Because when you search up how do I fix jumper's knee on the web, you get, isometrics, knee extension holds, right? Spanish squats. What are these? These are all quad exercises. Now, if you're in this category, awesome. Like, you've hit the jackpot here, right? Because you're working on strengthening your quad. That's obviously going to make you feel better because now your quad can handle more load. But if you're in this category on the side here, right, in number 2, you're not really going to get better. You may feel a little bit better because your quad can handle more load, but it's not really fixing the root problem. And over time, you're going to feel like, oh, my knee hurts again. And you're going to be stuck in this cycle of trying to strengthen your quad, feeling a little bit better, and then feeling worse again because you've just gone the completely wrong path. So if you're in the second category, you need to work on those weaker muscles after you find out what those weaker muscles are. Obviously, I can't tell you, these are all the muscles that are weak in you, and these are all the exercises, because that defeats the whole purpose of rehab, which is that everyone is different. And if you're thinking with that mindset, probably your rehab isn't going to be successful. There's no cookie cutter program. But notoriously speaking, hamstrings, adductor, core, all right, are notoriously weak in volleyball athletes. And why is that? That's because the nature of the sport is that it's very quad dominant. You're always on your toes. Your center of mass is forward. When your center of mass is more in front of you, you're going to be using your quad more when you jump and you land, you jump and you land, right? And that's why so many volleyballers I see that have knee pain are actually in this category, but they're trying to use this method to rehab their knee. And because the volleyball as a sport trains your quad up so much, to think that your quad is the weakest link is irrational, right? It's very, very, very unlikely. Again, I'm not going to say impossible because obviously everyone is different, but from all the cases that I've seen, there's rarely anyone that falls into the first category where they have weak quads. I'll give you scenarios where weak quads are much more common, but if you've just gradually built up knee pain over time, or you've been playing volleyball consistently for a couple weeks, months, or years, it's highly unlikely that your quad is the weakest link. And if you've been rehabbing it as if your quad is the weakest link, stop, reconsider, and replan out your rehab process. Right. Now, the people that do have weaker quads are usually the type of people that we talked about before, the people that actually started with acute but with a mechanism. Right, because say, for example, you've had an ACL tear. Obviously, you're not going to be playing or doing too much for the next 9 to 12 months before you return back to sport. So technically speaking, if you've done your rehab well, this shouldn't be happening. But a lot of the times you've been out for a long, long time and you suddenly come back and you've done no training in that time, you may fall into that weak quad category. But if you've been playing consistently, and there's no mechanism, nothing, you're probably in the overcompensating category, right? Now, I do want to highlight 2 more mistakes that people make when they find out that they're in this category. The first one is they don't load enough. Too many times I see volleyball athletes do rehab with just bands and body weight. That's a joke, because think about jumping and landing. That's multiple times of your body weight each time you jump and you land. Unfortunately, bands and body weight exercises are just not enough load to really get you to what you need. All right, so if that's you, find out how you can properly strengthen your hamstring or whatever it is that you need to strengthen in the proper way. All right, usually involves going to the gym and progressively overloading because that's the only way you build real strength. The second thing is they spam strength, right, with no context. What I mean by that is they work out, oh, my hamstrings are weak, right? So then these type of people, they go to the gym, they do every hamstring exercise under the sun. They do hamstring curls, RDLs, single leg RDLs, Nordics, everything that you can think of that targets the hamstring. And they're probably going to feel a little bit better because obviously they're stronger now. But let me ask you this. If you max out the hamstring machine, theoretically, you've maxed out the hamstring machine, do you really think you're going to change the way you jump? Answer is no. Why? Because jumping is a movement pattern that you've ingrained in yourself over a long time. And just because your hamstring is 30% stronger or 40% stronger, it's not really going to change the way you execute a movement. And that's what I mean without context, right? They strengthen their hamstring, but they don't really teach themselves how to use it in their sport-specific movement, which is obviously jumping. So you've got to strengthen the muscles that are weak and then apply them in a sport-specific movement. And that's the only way that you can change the way you jump and therefore not overload your quad and overcompensate with your quad. Obviously, people who fall into this category are going to be doing better than people who just don't load at all, right? But people in this category will still not be 100% successful with their rehab because they haven't really applied all that strength into the movements that's actually important for them. So if you're in the weak quad category, which is very rare, then obviously you work on strengthening your quads. And again, it's about applying the strength in your quads into the movements that you need for jumping so that you can use a bit more quad when you jump and so on and so forth, right? So that's how you rehab a tendinopathy properly. Let's quickly talk about PFPS. So remember, that's the type of person that feels more pain as they play more and more. And it's actually really important, again, to work out why, right? The nature of PFPS is that the patella with kneecap isn't tracking well in its groove, right? So normally the kneecap, which is a floating structure, tracks really smoothly in its groove and it doesn't cause any problems. But being a floating structure, it's easily influenced by muscle strength. So for example, the most common one for volleyball athletes is that their quads, because they're always used a lot, is they get really tight, right? And they start to pull the patella out of the groove, not dislocated, obviously, but they minor movements out of the groove. And so then when they bend and straighten, when they jump and land and move around the court, it starts to irritate all the structures around the knee. And that's why they can't pinpoint their pain, because it's the whole knee that feels like it's gotten sore. So then we've got to work out, why is my quad tight? When you get asked this question, we're back at, is it tight because it's weak or because it's overused? Okay, and so essentially, we're back here. And that's why identifying the root cause for tendinopathy and PFPS is actually very similar, but hopefully you guys can see that it's actually really important to make sure you're in the right category. Because if you're in the wrong category, you're never going to be able to successfully rehab your knee long term. So again, if you're in the weak category, you got to strengthen your quad. If you're in the overuse category, you got to work out what's not working well and how do I get those muscles stronger and then use it in my sport specific context, which is obviously jumping, landing, and side-to-side movements in volleyball. So if you reach this far in the video, you should at least know which category you're in and where to start when it comes to rehabbing your knee. Now, I do have a free knee rehab program specifically designed for volleyball athletes. I highly recommend you guys check it out. You can access it in the description below by joining my school community, and you'll be getting access to that free rehab resource. But as I was saying before, rehab does have to be personalized because you got to work out exactly what's weak and what's wrong with your movement pattern when it comes to producing force and absorbing force. So if you want my help to be your physio and coach to get you out of knee pain so you don't have to worry about your knee anymore, send me a DM 32 on my Instagram. Again, link will be in the description below, and I'll see you on the other side.